Hello and welcome to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck, and as you can see, we're going on the farm today. The farm of excellence here in Southern Oregon, and I'd like you to meet the farmer. Doreen, welcome to Journeys and Journals.
Thank you.
And I see you wore the right shirt.
Well, it fits.
The scarecrow, because you are a farmer.
That's right.
When
exactly
did you
right.
start farming?
Oh, I don't think I ever wasn't farming. My dad was a farmer, and I grew up on the farm, and so it's always been something that I did.
And how'd your dad get started on the farm?
He grew up on a farm also. His dad immigrated from Germany, and the family farmed there, so it goes, I don't know how far back, but my dad started farming the place that we have in 1934.
But is this the farm?
No, that was my granddad's farm, and that is a picture of my granddad with his two workhorses. And they were Maud and Betsy, and he used them, of course, the way all farms did at that time, to plow and work the ground and what have you.
And drive Mom to church on Sunday?
Well, he probably did for a while. However, my grandmother passed away when my dad was just 5. And the amazing thing about my grandfather, I think, is that he raised 6 kids by himself, because my grandmother died when the youngest child was 6 months old. And I'm impressed and amazed that my granddad managed to raise the kids like he
Now,
did.
tell me the family name. Grandpa was
William Bonert, and
his farm was where?
his farm was about 3 miles from where Seven Oaks Farm is, which is where we are now. That was the one my dad started, and the one that has gone through the family.
Now, is this Seven Oaks Farm?
That is part of Seven Oaks Farm, yes.
What's the story of this place?
Well, before it was a farm, there was a stage stop there, and the old log cabin in the picture was the store that went with the stage stop. And some of the things that you see scattered around here are things that we find.
Like this?
And from what anybody has told me, that was some kind of a pry thing that they used on the wagon wheels.
Ah, kind of a crowbar.
Kind of.
Because it's got a little bit of indent there. And what is this?
Well, that, yeah, is a hand-forged tie ring. Seven Oaks stage stop was where there were a grove of oak trees, and there were 7 big oaks with the numbers 1 through 7 blazed on the trees. And over the years, some of the trees have come down, and one of them was the tree that this was in. We had cut all the wood we could. We had gotten down to the base of the tree, and we couldn't cut anymore, so we were burning it, and this hunk of metal started showing. And it was a tie ring that had grown into the tree from the stage stop.
So it would have been for horses to be hooked up.
Right, to tie them up.
And so it used to just be attached to the tree, and then the tree grew over
Around it, yes.
Wow, and it's so heavy.
Yeah, well, it was whatever metal they used, but hand forged.
Of course. And this is likely hand forged too.
It looks like it.
Well, of course we know that no horseshoe comes from a horseshoe store, but this one has no holes in it.
Well, I don't know if they rusted shut or what, but this is one of the horseshoes that we have found there.
Now, how'd you find this, Doreen?
Well, because when we work the ground, every so often something turns up, and the horseshoes was, well, we do find occasionally horseshoes. We also found the wooden pipeline that came from the creek over to where they, we assume, watered the horses. But it just disintegrates as soon as it comes up. Well, I've tried to save a piece, but I've never been able to.
So they had a conduit for the water.
Must have, yes, and the size of those horseshoes used to just blow me away, but
I think I'd have better luck with this than I would one of those little ones. This horseshoe is pretty well worn on this side, which makes me think that somehow that's the real thing.
I'm sure it is, and some of the others we found were well used, and I assume that as they came through and needed to reshoe a horse, they just dropped the horseshoe wherever, but probably were able to do this at the stage stop.
Oh, that makes sense. Well, now, your family started 3 miles away from where the farm is now. What was the farm back then?
It was an orchard, and after the stage stop, apparently an orchard was planted there, and I think probably the black sheep of some wealthy Eastern family sent the black sheep son out there because there was a huge big house on the place and the orchard and a lot of outbuildings. And when I was 5, the big house burned down. We did not live in it, but it was right there. And after it burned, then my dad was able to buy more of the farm, more of the property around there.
I understand that word is remitterance or something like that. That you would send your kid off out west and say, we'll send money, just stay out of our hair.
I don't know, but I kind of gathered that was the story.
My dear friend Bill Young would tell me about these different wealthy young people who were just sent out west to get out of the family hair. I can't even imagine. Now, these are not plow horses. These look like dangerous bullfighting animals.
No, they're not. When Don and I started farming with my dad, we took over the cow herd, and at that point we had purebred Hereford cattle. And so we sold purebred bulls at different bull sales. And that's what those are. And of course I worked with them all the time too. And
So
they were.
you're not a bit afraid,
No.
are you?
There were some that I had a very healthy respect for, but these were young bulls, and
Oh, how much did they weigh?
well, probably the one was getting close to a ton. So
That's what my guess was.
yeah.
A ton on the hoof, I think they
Yes,
call it.
Yes.
Now, you went from raising animals to
Right.
when in the world did you go to farming?
Well, that actually came before. That was harvesting sugar beets, and the sugar beet industry in the Rogue Valley started at least in the 40s and maybe in the 30s. And in the Rogue Valley, they did not grow the beets for beets. They grew them for seed. And because the climate in the Rogue Valley was ideal, the winters didn't get so cold that the beet seed would frost out of the ground, but it got cold enough to trigger their seed response, because if they tried to grow them like in California, it was too warm in the winter and they would not trigger a seed stalk. And the sugar beets get really, really tall. But this was the old style thrashing machine that they pulled with a tractor. They weren't self-propelled. They pulled with a tractor, and then sewed the sacks by hand. There's a guy going along with a pitchfork pitching the stuff in, and it's dusty and itchy, and the stalks are about 6 feet long, and so they're miserable things to handle.
Well, now, is this the way it was done? Is this preparing the soil, or?
That's preparing the soil, and this is my dad actually, that's the first tractor that I ever drove. It's a little John Deere L, and what blows me away is my dad used it to plow with, and I absolutely cannot feature plowing with a little tiny tractor like that anymore.
Well, Doreen, how old were you when you were driving this tractor?
I think I was 5 or 6 when I first
Oh, wow.
Well, I didn't do it a lot. What I did probably was just drive to show I could. And then a little later on, the bales of hay for the cattle were too heavy for me, so we had a scoop that went on the front of the tractor, and my dad could put a bale of hay in the scoop, and then I could take it to whichever feed bunk it needed to go in.
The word feed bunk?
That's the thing that we put the hay in for the cattle to eat.
Oh, okay. I might have called it a trough or something like that, but it's a bunk?
Well, we always called it a feed bunk. In the picture of my granddad with the 2 horses, there is a feed bunk beside the barn.
This right here?
That right there, and that's what you would have thrown the hay in, and it kept it up off the ground, but it had sides so that the cattle couldn't pull, or the horses couldn't pull the hay out on the ground and walk on it and not eat it.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Spoons and forks, kids, keep your
There,
hands out of the...
Keep your feet off your food.
Now, did we talk about that one?
Well, that one is my dad. He's sowing sacks when they were doing sugar beet seed. And the sacks were great big old things, and you sewed the sacks by hand.
Well, were they a flat piece of burlap? Or?
They were a big bag.
Oh, and so the sewing was just for the top.
Right, right. Yeah,
Now,
the bag was all put together except for the top.
Who's this guy?
Well, that's my husband, and we were still growing sugar beets until 4 years ago, and that's Don standing in front of the sugar beets when they've gone to seed, which shows how tall they are.
Their shoulder height, or a little
Or
better.
above his head in a lot of cases, but as they get heavy with seed, they start to mash down.
What's behind your husband is a landmark. He is standing in front of this same, here's this old picture.
Of Table Rock.
Now,
Yes.
Table Rock is just your back door, isn't it?
Yes. I look out one window and I see both the Table Rocks, and I look out another window and I see Mount McLaughlin, and I look out my kitchen window and I see Mount Ashland. So at least at this point, I don't feel like I'm in the middle of civilization, and I love the view.
Middle of the farm country. Now, if I understood, Grandpa's farm was down the road a piece.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
3 whole miles?
3 whole miles, yes. That was where he started farming. He had been in the Rogue Valley and moved.
When did he come?
Well, he came first in the late 1800s. He met my grandmother there in the Rogue Valley, and they had 1 child there, and then they decided to go to Nebraska. And things weren't working out well for some reason, and I'm not totally sure, but they went to Nebraska. He was farming there and milking cows, and one night or evening when he was milking cows, there was a lightning storm, and it hit and killed 7 cows next to him, and he just loaded up the family and came back to Oregon.
My hair's standing on end just thinking about that. Now, you've talked about Grandpa, and his name is?
William Bonert.
That's this man.
That's him, yes.
And you've talked about your dad.
My dad was John Bonert.
And now you've talked about your husband.
That's Don Bradshaw.
And we're going to talk about your kids because, you know, this family really, really does get around. But the fruit stand, how did it ever get started?
Well, that was partly due to my kids. One of the kids was in FFA. They had been in 4-H, and then she was in FFA. She needed a project, and her dad said, well, why don't you grow strawberries? So she planted 400 strawberry plants, and we picked the strawberries. I think we got 7 flats of berries off of them that year. So the next year she wanted to plant more, and her sales barn, shack, whatever at that point was a picnic table under one of the big trees. I don't have a picture of it. I wish I did, because she and her sister had built it out of old scrap lumber, and it was pretty unique. But because the strawberry project was growing and she was going to go on to college, her brother inherited it, but it was still growing and he was going on to college. So Don and I inherited it, and we had this first little stand built.
Now, this is the beginnings.
That is the beginning, yes. And that little building was on skids so that we could pull it around from field to field. And the field that it's in front of in that picture happens to be sugar beets, because we rotate the crops. And the strawberries had been there, but then we moved the strawberry field, and so then we hadn't got the building skidded to the next field yet.
The reason that you rotate your crops?
Because it cuts down on disease and is better for the soil.
So one crop helps the next crop?
Yes.
Instead of all robbing the same stuff.
Right. And we very often plant a green manure crop or something like alfalfa, which adds nitrogen to the soil.
Well, I think I just found one picture that probably goes in an earlier time. But
Yes.
what's that?
Well, that's thrashing the sugar beets, and that's getting the seed out of them. And it would go along with sowing the sacks, but that was back when my dad was doing it.
And that's a little bigger tractor, is that right?
Yes.
Now,
Yes.
thrashing the seeds, because what would you do with all the rest of the sugar beet in this 6-foot stalk? And
When you let the sugar beet go to seed and the stalk grows, the beet does not develop very much. In fact, there'll be a little tiny beet. A regular sugar beet is pretty big, kind of fat and ugly, but pretty big. And when you let it go to seed, you may have a little bitty one about 6 inches long, and they're very, very woody. They aren't sweet. They don't have juice in them. They're just woody.
you mean the beet itself goes into the plant?
Pretty much. It sends all of its energy, yes, into the plant.
There are pictures here that just make my heart sing. What is going on here?
Well, actually, I think Don likes to show off with his row of trailers, but we start tomato plants and things, peppers, a lot of things. We start them in the greenhouse to get a jump on the summer, and so the plants will be pretty good sized before it's time to put them out in the field. And when they're a little bit bigger and need to get out of the greenhouse, he will put them on these trailers because the bottoms of the trailers are porous and you can water them and whatever. We can pull them into the barns at night if it's going to frost. And in the daytime, they can get pulled out into the sunshine. But he loves to show people that he can pull that string of trailers and turn figure eights and all kinds of things. And those are tracking trailers that just absolutely follow right where you go.
Ooh, next time you give me a call, please. These trailers, you've got pictures here that make my heart just sing. You've brought pumpkins here that prove that it's a real thing.
Right.
These came from?
Those are our pumpkins. And every year in October, we do a lot with pumpkins during the weekends. And of course, we put pumpkins out to sell. So we like to have a big display of them. And that particular year, we were taking a lot of people out to the pumpkin field in the wagons. Now we just do it with the school kids.
Oh, you do take school kids on tours?
We take them during the week out to the pumpkin field, and they get to pick a pumpkin. And then, of course, they can come back, and we have a little maze, and the animals are there. And I usually cut up apples for them to feed to the goats and sometimes the little horses. But we've got many horses and many donkeys, but you have to be real careful of little fingers when you feed horses.
Yes. Little horses and little donkeys. There's an artist here that just brought one of these.
Well, because I'm around animals, because I like animals, usually if I paint, it seems like there's an animal in the picture. And that was a little wild donkey, actually, in Arizona, but he was so cute, I couldn't resist. So
now, do you snap a photo and then come home and sit in your sunroom and paint this?
Yes.
Doreen, every one of these I just love, and I love to visit your place and feel like I'm walking in history. But your family, there's more to your family than just you and your husband,
right.
Or now your father's deceased.
Right. Our daughter and son-in-law farm with us, and two of the grandkids live there. The other grandkids live in Seattle, and so they come usually in the summer. And there was a picture of one of them. We did, for a while, we did the growers' markets. And she used to come and sell at the growers' market for us. And
this is downtown where?
In Medford. At that point, they had it down in the parking lot by the Sears shopping center. They've moved the Medford market, and we no longer go to the market
because
we don't have enough product and enough time, because we sell it right there at home.
Well, you've expanded your store so very much that there's, it was this little tiny place when I first went.
Yeah.
And now you built on.
Yes. The daughter and son-in-law made the commitment to go ahead and build a bigger building because we really needed the room. And we used to put the things that we needed to keep cool in that log cabin. It stayed fairly cool, but we still had to sell things like peppers and cucumbers and so forth within 24 hours because they wouldn't
keep fresh.
And now we still try not to keep things longer, but we do have a cooler in the new building so that we can protect things.
And they're still lots fresher than the grocery store.
Yes.
That's the neat thing. Are these leftovers? I mean, are these orphans?
And well, yeah, we always wind up with a few more pumpkins than we sell, which is fine because we wouldn't want to run out. And the leftovers usually get fed to the cattle because they are very nutritious and excellent cow feed. And the cattle like the seeds first. If we don't break them open, actually the big Texas longhorn steer can bite them open, and the horses can. The cows don't seem to have big enough mouths, but once they're broken, then they can eat them. They like them.
Well, and now I was in your Seven Oaks farm this last week, and I saw there were lots of them just in the field. Why?
Well, because we don't get them all picked, or the ones that are left in the field probably had a bad spot. And so we don't bring those in and then haul them back out somewhere. But they make very good green manure crop again. We work them into the soil, and they add a lot of humus, a lot of fiber to the soil, and help keep our earthworm population going.
Oh, happy worms.
Well, you need them to keep the soil loose, and they're a sign of healthy soil. So we like to have them.
Well, I can see those, and they're not waste, obviously.
No.
It's green manure. That means that it's live produce just being plowed back in.
And we work our corn stalks in while they're still green because they add a lot also. But the pumpkins, one of the reasons I wanted to bring them is to show the different kinds of pumpkins that...
Excuse me.
Yeah, isn't he cute? We get them from teeny tiny to actually quite large, too big for me to carry, and these are all varieties of pumpkins that have been developed from, well, pumpkins were native to the Americas, and they've found 11,000-year-old seeds in Mexico from pumpkins.
Well, now, can you eat this?
You probably could. It won't be very good because the meat in that will be so thin. If you're going to choose one,
Which one?
either the pie pumpkin, which is this one, or the Cinderella pumpkin, which is the flat, round one.
What about warty pumpkin?
And its name really is Big Warty Thing, and it's edible. I have not cooked or used one of those. I have cooked the Cinderella, and they're very good.
Have you ever cooked it? It comes in nut bread and cookies. Stick around. Let's talk more about pumpkin bread.
I brought you the recipes.
And the recipe.
Yes.
We should have that available here in the newsletter in the future. Thank you so much for tuning in to Journeys and Journals. I'm Bernie Martin Beck. Thanks, Doreen, for being my guest. Let's
Fun to
talk
be here.
pumpkins. My goodness, warty thing. Thanks again.